Hey, Honey Badgers. We're gonna start the whip and chat, the main whip and chat, in just a second. I started tinkering around with this Dreamer Designs peacock one that I unboxed not too long ago, and I thought I would just mention this real quick before I got into the main whip and chat portion of this video. I started putting on these larger crystals that are going to accent the eyes on all the peacock feathers. Sorry, don't know why my voice is suddenly starting to go. Getting second puberty or something, I don't know. But, what was I going to say? Oh, I went to put these on, and they're a little bit awkward to pick up with tweezers. The wax pencils I have, they're a little bit thin and not quite strong enough to pull them up and like hold on to them. See if you... Oh, well, now it's going to do it because I'm on camera and it wants to call me a liar. Okay, so maybe you can do it with that. I was going to say that we can still make this work. I was going to say that if you have problems with this, if you have thinner wax pencils, if it falls over, sometimes when you get these really big special drills, the easiest thing sometimes is to just pick them up and move them. Put down my wax pencil and just pop them over there, generally in the area, and then you can go back in with tweezers and kind of fudge them into the space they're supposed to be in. I've noticed that I'm putting these down and there's not a lot of wiggle room with the other stones that are supposed to go around it, which is one issue with designing canvases with these giant gems. These are a little dusty, so they're going to look a little bit dirty on camera right now, probably. But I always clean the canvases up before I do the completion reels. So if it's got factory dust on it, don't mind that. But I'll do a close-up so you can see how it's like kind of running into the other ones. So this is one canvas that you might have to work with and be a little bit patient with, I'm finding, because yeah, those stones, I'm probably going to have to push them around and get them to fit just right. And like this one over here, it might look like sometimes when you get into those, you kind of have to make the executive decision whether you want the stone there or not, or maybe replace it with something else that fits better. I don't know. Not quite at that point yet, but mainly I wanted to do this opening part to point that out if you start working on this one, that these stones are pretty large, and if you struggle with the pencil, see, now it's working. Why you gotta call me a liar? If you have trouble with that, though, I was going to say that sometimes with the biggest stones, it's easier just to pick them up and dump them over there. But now it's working for me, so I don't know. I guess you're on your own journey for this one. See, it dropped there. Ha! Not a liar. Okay. Anyway, all right. Let's get back to the main whip and chat of this video. So stay tuned. Okay, welcome back, honey badgers. Full disclosure, it's actually been a couple days since that first part. But before I get into the actual drilling, whip and chat, all of that, I had a thought. I don't know, several videos back, I don't know which one it was in, but I made a mention of seeing a video at some point where somebody had mentioned that when you have these canvases that have the surged edge, that maybe you could take the paint off with some nail polish remover. And this one is actually not one of, like, you know, the super nice linted back ones. I've actually been struggling with this canvas a little bit because for a Dreamer Designs canvas, I feel like it's a little bit on the cheaper quality as far as manufacturing. I've been struggling a little bit with like the surged edges. I don't know if there's a spot where I can show, but well, you see this part, like the edges are holding up, but you see how there's like little pieces hanging off the side? Those little pieces keep flaking off and getting into the glue field, so I keep having to stop and pick those off. And also, one of the reasons why I waited a couple days to come back and film this part is because in that earlier part I showed you about putting on the bigger pieces over here and how it was kind of a tight fit. So I figured what I would do is I'd go ahead and do those parts off camera. And then I tried to clean up these heart ones that I said were kind of factory dusty, and I went over them with makeup wipes and everything, but the dust is like down in the grooves, so I'll have to clean them up a little bit nicer once all the drills are on. I tried to give them a wipe, but anyway, what I was gonna say is I thought I would maybe try this little corner down here, since this isn't like a super luxe style of canvas, just to see if that trick would work. We could find out on camera, so I'll turn it this way. And I thought maybe I would try this little corner over here that has the what is it, like their guarantee stamp or whatever it is. I'm not sure if Dreamer Designs does it. I know that Diamond Art Club says that if you steal your paintings that it voids the warranty, but I don't ever care about that because I've never gone to them to get money back or anything like that. And this one is definitely going to need a sealing, because the other thing I'm running into, I don't know if it'll pick up on camera, but up here especially, oh, see there, you see those like big old divots in the glue field? It's more like I don't know what happened. There's like banding in the glue field where there's like decent glue and then dryness and then decent glue and then dryness. So that's a little bit irritating. So yeah, it is still working. I still am able to get the stuff to stick, but it's a little bit frustrating of a canvas to work on so far. But anyway, I thought I would try that acetone trick down here. So I brought in some nail polish remover, so I'll get just a little bit on a pad here. Let's see. And we'll just see what happens. Okay, so make sure I'm on camera so you guys can see it too. I mean, it's coming off a tiny bit, but not really. It seems pretty well imprinted on there, so I don't know if it's dependent on the type of canvas you do this on, but it doesn't seem to be. I mean, you see a tiny bit of the glue, or not glue, the ink coming off there, but otherwise it's not doing much. But it's not a really big deal because I planned on cutting this canvas off anyway as far as the edging. But yeah, I figured while I had you on camera we would go ahead and check that. But yeah, from what I can tell, it doesn't look like it does much. So, oh well. Now we know. Alright, hold on. Let me find the lid to this container here. Alright, so before I get into the drilling, I thought I would show you a little bit of a overview of what I've done so far. So I filled in all of this color up here, this, I think it's 820 blue, it's just standard blue. This is a mix of standard drills and crystal drills, so yeah, you'll go back and forth with this one. So I guess you can kind of see it there. The green bordering here is all green ABs, so that's all over the top. This standard red crystal there, that's what I'm going to be working on down at the bottom for this video. So that's what it looks like next to those sort of candy shaped heart ones. But that's going to go in the flowers down below in a minute. And then some blue crystal. And then those are white ABs. I know they kind of just look like 5200s, but they do have an AB finish on them. And then the large blue stones. There's just some brown and standard 310 down in there, and then also some AB banding. What is that? I don't know what that is. Some AB banding around the eye. What else did I do? Oh, I put in the orange border around the hearts down here on the feathers of the peacock. And then you have some plain crystals in the smaller feathers, I guess, the eyes sort of. And then you have more rows of white AB and then green AB. And then these red spots are the flowers I'm going to do. And then this band right here is all white AB next to a couple different colors of standard blue drills. So that's what I've gotten done so far in the last couple days since I talked to y'all. So I guess now we can get into the whip and chat part of this, huh? Welcome back to one I haven't done in a while as far as a type of video. If you saw my post the other day when I was talking about having to postpone doing this type of video because of you know, my pain levels and stuff, I'm doing better now. Every so often, it's not anything that's like every single day crippling pain. It goes back and forth. So I'll have a day every so often where you know, if you're in the autoimmune illness, chronic illness community, you know, a lot of times when you get first diagnosed, they give you the speech about the spoons. Or if you're not familiar with that and you've just heard that term going around, basically it's a speech you get from your doctor pretty early on when you're diagnosed, where they talk about, they put it in terms of like your energy level. So they talk about you're supposed to kind of divide up your day within this concept of how many spoons can you use throughout the day. And that's supposed to be sort of a symbolism for how much energy you can expend throughout the day before you hit your pain wall or your symptoms kick in, your flares start up, that kind of thing. So you end up hearing the term of how many spoons are you going to give to this for your daily allotment. So yeah, that was what that was, is I hit a day where all my spoons were gone. But that's not every day. I do have days where I'm relatively normal and I can get around pretty well. And then there are days where, you know, I'll spend a good amount of hours getting around on a cane. And then I'll, you know, take a day of rest, and then I'll come back and I'll be able to maybe not be on ambulatory aids and be able to kind of limp around a little bit. And then sometimes, every once in a while, I get a day where I look pretty normal, where my bum leg is almost non-existent. But those are like super good days. But either way, I try to stay as positive as I can about it, because I come back to the idea that, you know, I have congenital conditions, which means I was born with it in my DNA. One of the conditions I have is called lymphedema tarda, which is a more rare form of lymphedema, where it means that basically you're born with the coding for lymphedema, congenital lymphedema. There's another type where it can show up in children, like they just basically come out of the womb and maybe they look relatively normal for 1 or 2 years, and then they have a limb that you know, turns wonky 1 to 2 years in, or, you know, maybe it'll show up 4 or 5. It usually shows up pretty early, typically before they start their school years, when it's like the early type of congenital lymphedema. And then there's another type that I have where basically you're born with the same coding as the children form, but for some reason it just sits dormant in your body until your mid-30s, and they don't know why. They can't figure it out. There's not a lot of information about it out in the medical world. There's very few doctors in the US who are trained or specialized in it, so that's why it took me so long to get diagnosed at all, because for years I was in that wheel of, all your labs come back fine. I'm like, yeah, but my legs look weird. And they're like, yeah, I don't know why. And then it started spreading to other parts of my body. And they were still like, yeah, I don't know why. It's weird. It's like, and I remember being so frustrated because it was becoming it was getting to the point where it was becoming seriously crippling because I was having all of this fluid back up in my body and they didn't know how to get rid of it. They didn't know what was causing it, all that stuff. Until finally, by accident, one of my doctors had an idea of like, okay, well, maybe we'll send you to somebody who has an idea about autoimmune stuff. And it just so happened there was one person in that office, one of the therapists they sent me to, that almost instantly was like, oh, I know what this is. Pretty sure. It's like, I mean, they did like well, obviously we'll need deeper testing, but I'm pretty sure I know what this is. And so that's what started me on the treatments, and it was a long process, but yeah. So now that's kind of where my own advocacy work comes in, where I know what that feels like to go through that for years on end and have zero answers. So now it's kind of like my mission to, like, when I have something figured out, or, you know, something that might be helpful to somebody, because I'm always very much like, check with your own doctor, because I don't know your body, but if it could help, I'm willing to put it out there as like, at least talk to your doctor about it. Have a conversation about it. That was just on my mind because I'm getting ready to talk about Dorothea Dix, who is very much a health advocate. So yeah, I guess I went off on that little tangent about having all of this postponed and all that. But yeah, let's start talking about Dorothea Dix. So, Miss Dix, because from what I've read about her, I don't think, as far as I can tell, I don't think she ever got married, had children, or anything of that, that line. I think she just did straight advocacy work for pretty much her whole life. But man, she got some stuff accomplished. So she was born April 4th, 1802 in Hamden, Maine. And from what I've read, it said that when she was born in Hamden, it was still considered part of Massachusetts. But now, or sorry, am I saying that right? Yeah, now it's considered part of Maine. When she was born, it was still considered part of Massachusetts. So she spent the majority of her childhood growing up in, I want to say it's Worchester, but I'm a little bit nervous about that because I feel like that's one of those cities that probably has a more local pronunciation, because I know in the area I live in, there's a lot of cities in North Carolina that are not said the way they look. So I think it's Worcester, but if you're from what looks like Worcester, Maine in my notes, or Massachusetts, if you're from that area and I am not giving the correct local pronunciation, feel free to give me the right one in the comments down below, because I don't know. But written form, it looks like Worcester. Okay, so she grows up in Worcester, one of 3 children. I think she's the oldest one, born to Mary Bigelow and Joseph Dix. And Joseph Dix was a traveling Methodist preacher. And from what I understand, he was, I think it sounds like her parents were married, but it sounds like Joseph Dix, for some reason, was sort of in and out of the picture. I know he traveled for work, but it also just seems like from what I've read, it didn't feel like he had a really strong presence in her life. And when he was around, there were reports of him being alcoholic and abusive, and it got to the point where Dorothea was just encouraged to go live with a wealthy grandmother in Boston. So she moves to Boston, and it's around 1821 that this wealthy grandmother helps financially back Dorothea to start a school in that area for the impoverished and abandoned children in the neighborhood. So she's teaching him how to read and write and do their arithmetic and all that stuff. And between this time, around she's doing the school 1821. She starts the school, and then 1824 to 1830, those years, she also has this sort of side hustle going. Let me get better positioned over here. She has this sort of side hustle going where she's writing stories and devotional books for children, and those actually become pretty popular. in her day. And so she's doing that, and then somewhere in there, I think I read it was like through hanging out with one of her friends or something. One of her friends gets her involved in what starts out to be her advocacy work, and she starts doing volunteer work with her friend at one of the local prisons, or I think she kind of bounced back and forth between prisons and hospitals, doing some kind of volunteer work in those places. And while she was doing that, hold on, I think I lost, well, I guess I'll track it down later. I think I had a crystal pop off somewhere. So while she was doing that, she came to find out that when she was doing the volunteer work at the prison, she found out that locally there were a bunch of mentally ill patients, or, you know, people that for one reason or another were brought into hospitals and deemed mentally ill with different things. They were just thrown in with the prisoners, not for anything they did wrong, just because people were saying, well, we didn't know where else to put them. And so, oh, there's the one that popped off. It's way over there. Okay. So Dorothea is looking at this being like, yeah, that's not cool. These are people. They deserve humane treatment. What the hell's wrong with you? So she starts talking to her grandmother and her friends and people she knows around town that might have a little bit of money and interest in the topic. And when did she start? I think it's 1836, I believe. She has some success. She spends a good amount of time going to, you know, city meetings and hospital boards and things like that, and saying, can we do better? And I think it's around 1836 that she finally gets this project off the ground where she develops the state hospital for this, what is it called? State Hospital for the Insane in Worchester. That's what they called it. And it ends up becoming the very first public hospital dedicated to mental health in the entire United States. You know, I first briefly mentioned Dorothea Dix in my first History Dig video on Elizabeth Blackwell, which I will link down below if you want to check that out. And when I was reading up on Dorothea Dix for this one, I noticed that at this point in Dorothea Dix's career, her professional sort of story arc took a similar path to Elizabeth Blackwell, in that, you know, she starts out in the US and then learns some stuff over here, takes it over to England, and then eventually comes back over here and does the whole back and forth thing for a while. That's what Dorothea Dix ends up doing. She's really inspired by all the success she's having developing these programs in the States, and so she decides to take a few years and go over to England and see what she can do, and basically starts the process all over again. She goes to their hospitals and their prisons and talks with their doctors and their, you know, prison wardens and all that, and she takes notes on the conditions in all these places. She drafts these reports for the House of Commons over in England, and, you know, gives her recommendations for what can be done. And her ideas really end up taking off over there. She ends up getting a lot of reform going between both England and Scotland. So she ends up doing that until about 1840, and then she decides she's ready to come back to the States. So, you know, when she comes back over here, she basically starts the whole thing all over again. Because she's really feeling this work, and I imagine there's always more you can do. You know, I'm sure even today, in today's world, there's still plenty of room for advocacy work with, you know, the areas she's talking about as far as mental health reform. I mean, I know we don't really do asylums here the way they did back in the day. We kind of steered away from those kind of places. I mean, there are still psychiatric hospitals, but, you know, they're not really done the same way they were done in the 1800s, obviously. But even so, with modern medicine, I'm sure, I mean, I've been out of the medical field for a while, but I'm sure there's probably still plenty of room for improvement with mental health care and things like that, because everybody is still talking about it as a topic of sharing experiences and trying to remove stigma and all of that kind of stuff. So I imagine there probably is plenty of work to keep you busy for literally a lifetime in her case. But yeah, she's doing this back and forth, going through the process again. She's gaining more and more popularity for her work, and it gets to where it's even gaining traction and going up into Canada and reforming hospitals up there. But she's mainly focusing on the States now. And at this point, she ends up developing Dorothea Dix Hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she has that going from 1856 to 2012. And then after 2012, the land was converted to Dorothea Dix Park, aptly named. She's basically running all the stuff at the hospital there about until the start of the Civil War, which is about 1861. And at that point, President Abraham Lincoln decides to make her the superintendent of nurses. I think, what was I talking about? I think I said it in my last History Dig video. I think when I briefly mentioned her in the Elizabeth Blackwell video, I had said that I had misspoken and said, well, she wasn't the superintendent, she was one of them, and that was misinformation on my part. She was in fact the superintendent. She was named by President Lincoln himself to oversee all war nurses during the Civil War, and she headed up recruitment and training and just oversaw anything that had to do with the nurses, including one particular nurse, which, if you're any sort of bookish person, you might recognize as one of her, I was about to say one of her charges, but that makes her sound like a governess or something. One of the nurses under her lead was Louisa May Alcott from Little Women fame, which during the Civil War, I guess it would have been a young Louisa May Alcott. So I thought that was kind of cool, running into that little factoid. But yeah, she oversaw recruitment, training. She stayed on top of like supplies, doing supply runs, trying to keep supplies as stocked as possible. Even though, if you read about the Civil War, that was, I mean, it's not just Civil War, it's like any wartime. Staying stocked up on supplies is one of the big challenges, because, the suppliers are all busy, or roads are blocked up, or, there's always something going on because it's wartime. But she tried to stay on top of it the best she could. And she also was advocating, because, she can't help herself. She was advocating for proper care for wounded soldiers on the battlefield, which, I mean, again, it's wartime, so, you can't make it spa-like necessarily, but she was just looking at them like, okay, well, I get the situation, I get the conditions, but how can we make this as sanitary as possible? Let's not just be butchers out in the field if we can help it, So she was fighting for that, as well as fighting for the conditions for the nurses themselves, which I thought was pretty cool. Because I remember when I first started learning about Civil War nurses in school, I don't know, it kind of, when I was learning about them in the past, it always felt like Civil War nurses were sort of treated as an afterthought a lot of times, where from the accounts I read, I mean, yes, some of them were respected, but it kind of felt like a lot of them were just sort of taken for granted, like, oh yeah, well, of course there should be women here to take care of the stuff I don't want to do. And it just seemed like a lot of them were really verbally disrespected and overworked and all of that. And I always felt really bad for them. And I mean, that's still an issue in nursing today, obviously. But when you think about it, especially with Civil War era, a lot of these women, like, I mean, by the time World War I, World War II came around, they had an idea of how to go about training for war nursing, environments and training and all that. They had an idea of where to go from that because of the Civil War. But anything before the Civil War, what did they have to work off of? Is just women that were, before that they were working farms, they were school teachers. Some of them came from wealthy families and were just compelled to go help with the war against their family's wishes. I mean, these women were coming from all sorts of backgrounds and not really entirely sure what they were getting themselves into, and then just thrust into these environments where you see these men with, disfigurements and limbs missing and half their faces blown up and all these things, and things they've never seen in their lives before. And there, you have the mental need to get around that, because I remember when I first started as a CNA, and the first time I walked into a hospital floor and I saw patients that had all of these conditions, and the first time I saw a stoma and an open chest wound and all of the, like, the very first time you see those things, it is jarring, because it's one of the things they talk about in medical training, is that there's no training for when your eyes are directly on it. You can read about it all you want in a textbook. When it's right in front of your face, it's a completely different feeling. But in the moment, you just have to figure it out. That's one of the things about medical training, is they can textbook teach you all they want. They can get you to where you're, obviously certified to do the work. But as far as being in the middle of it, the emotional aspect of that, there's not really anything they can do to adequately prepare you for that, other than throw you into it and just hope you were able to wrap your mind around it. And so I can empathize with the medical nurses during the Civil War of what that must have felt like, to see men in that condition for the very first time, and trying to process that. And at the same time, you have these men who are doctors who are just used to being gruff with women and just being like, well, just get over here and take care of it. And not to say that all doctors were like that. I mean, I'm sure there probably were guys that were compassionate about it. But I just imagine there's probably a lot of guys that were just like, I don't have time for this, get over it. So Dorothea Dix comes in, and that's random yellow stone in the middle. She comes in and advocates for these nurses. And, she was appointed by President Lincoln himself. So she uses some of that power, and she says, this is what I want you to do. And she goes in and says, I want these women to have their food, housing, and transportation all covered, completely covered. Plus, I want a guaranteed 40 cents a day pay for every one of these nurses. Whether they're in the hospitals, battlefield, I don't care. I want every one of these women supported. And she did all of this without ever taking a salary herself as being superintendent of all these nurses. And I read this and I was just like, damn, girl, go get it for them. So yeah, that was really cool. And then after the war ends, she gets really involved in Veterans Affairs, basically what would amount to Veterans Affairs now, as far as making sure the surviving soldiers of the war had adequate medical care, as far as follow-up care to their wounds, and also decent pensions that they could live off of, so that, you know, they're not out in the streets. And I didn't read much about it as far as mental health care, because I don't know how much of that was a conversation as far as Civil War era, you know, like wartime, or you know, war caused PTSD, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure it was a conversation. They may have not been using that terminology, obviously, but I'm sure there was probably at least a little bit of conversation as far as the emotional and mental damage that a lot of men were coming back with. So I imagine that that was also probably part of her advocacy work, is to make sure that as much as possible within the medical means of the era, that these men were getting treatment. A lot of things is sometimes you have to wait for science to catch up to where you need it to be to get the help you need. So that's another thing. I do feel for the soldiers back then, because having decent medical care, especially in the mental health aspect for soldiers, is even today such an under-addressed topic. That was one of the things that caused a lot of damage in my own childhood, was my dad being a Vietnam veteran, and just there not being proper mental health care for those guys coming back from Japan. And because my dad was one of the corpsmen in Japan, and when I was a kid, it was found out that he had bipolar disorder, and for much of my childhood, he was either not treating it at all, or he was so heavily medicated that the medications they had him on would have him waver back and forth between either being nearly catatonic, to where I was, it got to the point where when I got older, I was basically pretty much a caretaker for him when he was going through that period. And then sometimes he would come out of those medications and go into periods where he was very rage-filled, and then you'd have to ride those out, and then there would be the talk of like, oh, okay, I guess we have to change his medications again. And that was the thing, is that it was just always, well, we'll just put him on a different medication. And they didn't do a lot as far as actual therapies. They just wanted to drug these guys. And just, again, that mentality of like, well, just do your best to get over it. There just wasn't really good help, as far as, I feel like now, you know, again, there's probably still plenty of room for improvement, because, you know, like I said, you have to wait for science to catch up and theories and therapies to be developed. But I feel like there's a lot more therapies to pull from now than there ever was before. Because there's, you know, like, I just did a post the other day where I, on the community post, I talked about, with my physical therapy, being introduced to sound therapy as a form of pain management. But sound therapy can also be used for mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression and all those kind of things. It's just another tool in the toolbox. But again, that's an example of waiting for science to catch up, is that it was around, but I don't think it was talked about quite as much even, 20, 30 years ago. But now there's a lot more talk about using things like that, whether it's sound therapy or acupuncture or, things like isolation chambers, tanks, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different therapies out there that just weren't available to him, and even more so wouldn't have been available to guys in the Civil War, obviously. So yeah, I'm sure Dorothea Dix was advocating for getting them as much help as would have been available in their era. But it's really cool that even for that time, she was out there thinking about that, being like, these guys are going to be messed up when they come back home, man. We should be doing something for them. Because, that's, even now, that's a topic of when guys come back home. Because my older brother is also a war veteran. And my brother's had plenty of issues that, he hasn't really gotten into a lot of the deep details with me, but he's told me little snippets enough to where I know he's carrying a lot of dark stuff in his head. And I worry about him, even though he's been much more active as far as, seeking out therapy and stuff like that, and trying to quiet his mind and learn all of that kind of stuff. He's a lot better about it than our dad ever was. So I am proud of him, but I do worry about him. And he's, that's more recent conflicts. He was overseas. That was late 90s, early 2000s, I think. But yeah, he still carries damage from that to this day. So I really love that this woman was out here fighting for just everybody, all the underdogs, the mentally stressed out that were just being shucked into prisons because nobody knew where to put them. And, she was fighting for what essentially would amount to, in today's conversation, the idea of the wage gap. She was fighting for that, for women to be adequately compensated for the work they were doing and not just be gruffly pushed aside by their male counterparts and being like, just be glad you got a job. She was out there saying, no, they're putting in sweat and tears out here too. What are you talking about? So yeah, I love it. And it's funny because when you look at pictures of her, she doesn't, like all the pictures I've seen of her, she doesn't put off this sort of big, gruff mama bear kind of exterior. She looks a little bit more on the quiet, and I was going to say Sunday school teacher, but like she actually did teach Sunday school, so that would kind of make sense. But she has that sort of more quiet, soft demure, if I could go back to that term, but using it in the proper sense this time, not the way TikTok took off with it. But yeah, she would have been more in the accurate sense of the word demure, had that personality to her, at least from what I've seen in her photos. But she's out here doing all this, just out here being like, I said what I said, get out of my way, make this happen. And I guess that must have been spottable in her personality for Lincoln to be like, you know what? I got a spot I need you to take over. Because I would think that'd be a big deal to be pointed out by the president himself, be like, yeah, I need you to see all my war nurses. Because I don't even know what would have, as far as career-wise, I don't know who she was, working with or sort of communing with at the time that would have recommended her for that position. I don't know what would have put her in the line of sight of the president himself, but somewhere. I guess maybe because of all of her lobbying prior to the war for mental health rights and advocacy and prison reform and all that. I guess her name was getting around, and maybe he read up on her and was like, you know what, I might have something I need her to do. Yeah, after the war, she takes up prison reform, Veterans Affairs, prison reform, and somehow, in between all of that, she still has time. Like I said, she was teaching Sunday school. She also finds time to teach Sunday school classes to female convicts. And I'm just reading more and more about all these things she's doing. And I'm just like, girl, when do you sleep? But I guess that's the thing is, once you find a passion in life, you do kind of get to that point in your mind where, not that you don't ever want to sleep, but you kind of find a place in your heart where you're okay. Like you do, obviously you do want sleep, but when your energy is getting burned up by something you have a deep passion for, you're okay with the sleep not being there sometimes because you're so excited about the work you're doing. And I think maybe that's what was driving her, I would imagine, is that she found such a deep passion for the turnaround she was creating in society in general, and just that drive of, hey, I'm doing good things. Like the world is getting better because of these little things I'm pushing for. I think that was probably a good driving force for her to keep going with it. And that attitude of, and it's not the same as when people lust after just money, when you just have a drive to make a lot of money and you're just like, yeah, I'll sleep when I'm dead. No, it's a different kind of drive when it's something that is bringing joy or comfort to the population as a whole. I don't know, it hits different, as they say. But yeah, she kept going. As far as I know, right up until her passing. And she passed it. I wrote down here somewhere. It was like 85. Yeah, she's 85 when she died. So it's wild to me, because I also read that over the course of her lifetime, hold on, I wrote it down here, the other somewhere. Over the course of her lifetime, her advocacy work ended up creating 30 psych hospitals centered around compassionate care for mentally struggling patients. So, they weren't just shucked into prisons anymore. She was making sure that they were given places where there was professional, compassionate care, and she really worked to make sure that these places had actual therapeutic environments to work in. She was really, really trying to get away from this kind of stuff where they would just, strap them to bedposts or just dunk them in water booths and all that kind of stupid stuff that they thought was cutting edge. Where she was like, yeah, that's actually abuse. Let's not do that anymore. So she was really working towards making environments that were very much more calming and peaceful. And hey, here's a thought. What if we actually hear patients out and maybe try to get to the root of why they're struggling the way they're struggling? And we don't just dismiss them as hysterical people. What if there is a deeper root cause that maybe we could talk about? What about that? And maybe we do it in an environment where they feel safe and not victimized. We could try that for a little bit, see how that goes. And, and I'm sure when she brought up these ideas, I'm sure it didn't take off at every place she went to, because I know from personal experience that when you're talking about anything that has to do with the medical community or the military community or government community, anything like that, change is not overnight. There's usually a lot of paperwork, a lot of people that you got to go up against that are like, oh, I don't know about that. I mean, we've kind of been doing it this way for a long time. But if you push enough, eventually you hit somebody, not literally, but figuratively, you hit somebody that will give you a minute and say, you know what, you might be onto something, and maybe we go about it this way. And you get the ball rolling on having change come around. And I think that's what it was with her, is that it wasn't that she just walked in and said, this is the way it's going to be, and it just happened overnight. I think she was just really persistent in what she believed in, and she just kept going with it. And I'm sure she got a lot of pushback in the early days of saying, because, that's, if people had had a problem with it before, they would have fixed it. But, I'm sure there were probably plenty of people beforehand that were just like, they're fine. Look, they're not even completely here mentally. Why would they care? And she was really pushing for, no, these are human beings. They deserve compassionate care as fellow Homo sapiens. And I think she wore people down enough to where they were like, yeah, all right, let's try it. And I think there was enough of a result in what she was suggesting that she probably had people like, holy crap, it's working. They're actually calming down. It's like, yeah, it's weird when you don't strap people to beds and throw water on them. They tend to respond better to treatments. So, yeah, she started developing these places that were much more calming, much more comforting. And I think she probably did a lot to really forward the mental health industry as a whole, as far as our approach to mental health and compassionate care, and not being so dismissive of people that had mental complexities. But, that's, again, you have to wait for the science to catch up. Because even with compassion, you're still going to run into the problem of like, well, I mean, of course I care, but I don't know what to do with them. So I think that was probably one of her driving interests of like, okay, well, maybe we don't have all the answers as far as actual treatment to, have them back out in the world, but while they're here, can we at least make their environment a little less toxic and stop putting them in places that sort of exacerbate their stress? And I think she found enough people behind her that were like, hey, that is a thought, Yeah, I think about that sometimes. Like when you hear people that say, wow, I was really born in the wrong era and I'd really love to go back in time. The medical field is always the first thing I think of, as far as like, I'm not arguing that it wouldn't be fun to time travel, but I really do appreciate a good medical advancement, just on the topic of, like thinking of the pandemic, I lost, I didn't know them personally, obviously, but through family stories, I discovered that I lost two, I'm thinking of like generationally, they would have been my, second or third great grandfathers on both sides from the Spanish flu. Talking about my mom's parents. So my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, her grandfather, and also my mom's dad, his grandfather, were both lost in the Spanish flu. Because it came on so quick and people didn't really know how to bring people back from it once you had it. It's just kind of like, hope you survive. But then generations later, I went through the whole pandemic era here largely unaffected because of medical advancements that weren't available for my family's earlier generations. And I think it's the same for mental health. You know, when I was mentioning sound therapies and using that as a form of pain management, that wasn't something that even my dad did in therapy, I don't think. It certainly wasn't anything that my grandparents or great-grandparents would have done, but it is something that's suggested now as a legitimate therapy practice in physical therapy communities and alternative medicine communities and things like that. But it's not just having the science get there. You also have to get to a place where people as a society are open to those sort of ideas, I think. It's like when you think about, because in that post I also mentioned, the community post I did, I also mentioned that part of that therapy is we would do segments of meditation time and learning how to do that. And I think, meditation became more popular. I mean, it's always been around in some form, but I think it became more popular, at least in the States, kind of around the 50s and 60s. But it wasn't something that was really talked about, again, in like my grandparents' day. I mean, I'm sure there were probably people who were doing it, but I think largely it would have been one of those things where, society as a whole would have been looking at people back in like the 30s and 40s during my grandparents' time, looking at people doing that, being like freaking weirdos. I mean, people still do that now. There's still plenty of people, even in today's age, that you talk about meditating, and they still do that. It'd be like, freaking weirdo. And I admit there are some people that do get a little bit weird with the meditation and overcomplicate it and get into like chanting and whatever, but that's not really how I do it. I'm kind of more simplified in my approach with it. But I'm just saying, like, you have to get to where people are more open to hearing about that kind of thing as a society, I think, to get large amounts of people on board with doing medical reform on a large scale. Getting people to, not run away when you're like, hear me out, damn it. But I think when it comes to things like in the medical community, it's a little bit easier with being able, when you start on a small scale and you show measurable success with patients, because the medical community, it is a very high stress community to work in. So if you have medical professionals that are given an opportunity to have not only their patients be calmer and happier, but you give them a situation where their job can be that much easier, they're going to be all about hearing you out. If you can take some of the stress out of their day, they're going to be like, wait, hold on. What do we need to do? Let's try it. Let's see what happens. So they're not over there, hyped up on Red Bull and tears. They said, oh, shit, maybe I can have them calm down enough to where I could get through a full sandwich. Great. And then just everybody from the patients to the staff is going to be that much more blissful as much as possible in, again, that sort of environment. So, yeah, thank you, Dorothea Dix, for getting out there and starting the conversation, And I could see where she would be inspired by, having the sort of difficult, maybe even problematic dad. Because, allegedly, I didn't know him personally. I don't know. I didn't read anything about like what ended up happening with her siblings. I don't know what happened there. But yeah, she definitely did the most with her years on this plane. I am just about done with this flower. So I think what I'll do with this little video, which I'm not sure how long this is going to be now, I think I'll go ahead and finish this little flower here, and then I think I'm probably going to go rest for a little bit. Maybe even try to get some sleep if my body cooperates. It's going to be great. And then in a few hours I'll get up and probably work on editing this video, and then maybe having this up by tomorrow afternoon, possibly, if my computer cooperates. And I guess also if YouTube upload cooperates on their end, because every so often that happens when I try to upload a video, and then it seems like it's going to be a relatively simple process, and then for some reason in the middle of it, it does that whole, this is taking longer than expected. I'm like, yeah, I know. And then it just sits in that state for ages, and it's just like, you have the hold music, please hold. Someone will be with you at some point. All right, so those flowers are done. And then I've got a few more colors to work out here. It's coming together pretty quickly overall. I do like that it's kind of a nice mix of standard drills and crystals. That's fun. I just wish that the quality overall was done a little bit better on this. But in general, I do like how this is coming out. This is one that I got on one of their big, I think like buy one, get one 60% off, something like that, sales. So this particular canvas only ended up costing me something like, I don't know, 12 or 15 bucks or something when I bought it. So that is making me feel a little bit better about this being a little bit on their lesser, nicer quality scale for being a Dreamer Designs. Because I think originally this one goes for something like 42 or 45, something like that. But it is pretty. So I think I've got something like 6 more colors to do. Mostly the purples, a little bit of green. But yeah, that's how the flowers are coming out overall. Very nice. And then the next section I'll probably knock out. I've been mostly doing it by what's the least amount. Typically that's how I tend to knock out canvases. I'll either pick the area that has the least amount of color drills or the most, depending on how enthusiastic I am that day. And then I'll try to knock that out. And for some reason it makes me feel like it goes faster that way. So let me see. So this one with all the ones in it, oops, I just turned on my board, is color 3. So, okay. So all of this, hold on, let me cut it down here. So yeah, this background around You're Amazing is probably in the next section I'll knock out, because I think that's the only spot for all the ones. So that will be this light purple color. And then I also have, the next one I'll probably do is these G's on the feather veining is all of that kind of champagne colored crystal. So that'll be cool. End up looking very kind of Vegas-y. So yeah, I guess that's it for this one. So I'll wrap it up, and I'll probably I've pulled some pictures of Dorothea Dix and some of the spots I was talking about throughout here. If I can find a picture, I will put it up in the video every so often throughout this, which, I mean, if you've gotten to this point in the video, you've already seen that. But yeah, I'll try to give you some background context visuals to help you out with what we're talking about here. But I'll leave you on this thought. I'm going to lift it up just a little bit. And just, you know, take that away with you. Keep in mind You're amazing. Just take that with you when you exit out. And just, take that into the world. Remind the world that you're flippin' amazing. And tell them I sent you. Alright guys, that's what I have for this one. Thanks for hanging out, and we will talk soon. Bye guys.